Matt.
Thanks,
Give
Bob.
it to him, Matt. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you for the invitation. And just to echo the comments of the great job that Terry's been doing, you know, I'm embarrassed to say I was wrong. I thought, when I got the invitation a month ago, I thought, okay, Castleton, January on a Saturday morning. Okay, there'll be a few people here. Boy, it's amazing to see all of you. Whatever you're doing in Rutland County, if you could bottle it and sell it to the other counties so we could duplicate sort of the attendance and the enthusiasm, the state would go a long way. So much appreciated, the big turnout, and wish I could do that in other areas because I have traveled, talked to Rotary clubs, civic groups, high school groups, civics classes, Republican meetings all across the state, talking about Vermont energy policy and the proposed carbon tax. Because I think it is a pivotal issue for our state and for our country, and I think there is a side that's not being told, so I appreciate the opportunity to tell it from our perspective. You know, my friend Representative Peter Fagan suggested that I could win over the audience very easily if I brought bottles of heating oil to distribute. I can't do that because what with the hazardous materials regulations in the state, but I do bring good news, and I'd like to start with a little good news. And the good news is what we've been seeing in the markets over the past couple of years, particularly in the past 6 months. As you've undoubtedly recognized, gasoline prices, diesel prices, heating oil and propane prices have declined significantly. Now, you may look at the oil lobbyist, the representative from the fuel dealers, and say, isn't that a bad thing? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Remember, we are the last stop before it gets to your tank, before it gets to your car, before it gets to your, before you burn it. And generally speaking, you know, our profit margins, the price of our wholesale price go up or go down, and generally we make the same amount of money. However, our carrying costs go down when the prices go down. We don't have to borrow as much money to buy all that fuel to sell to you. We also, our customers pay us on a timely manner. Remember, we have to buy it and then borrow from the bank and then sell it and then get paid later. So generally speaking, lower prices are not only good for consumers, they're also good for us. They're also great for the Vermont economy, for the national economy. Economists say that for every 1 cent the price of gasoline goes down, that adds $1 billion in disposable income to the U.S. economy. So lower prices of gasoline and other energy products mean more money to save, to invest, and to spend. And that's a good thing for our economy. Here in Vermont, what we've seen a reduction, 34% in heating oil, about 25% in propane, about 30% in gasoline and diesel fuel. What that means is it amounts about $1 a gallon. So for a typical home that has 2 cars and heats with oil or propane, we're talking about a savings this winter, this year, of $2,000. Spread that out, roughly speaking, we're talking about $500 million thanks to the price drop. That you're saving, you're investing, and you're spending. You're spending at restaurants and going out to eat and going out to dinner, going out to movies. This is a good thing for the economy, right? Another $500 million here in Vermont this year that we're going to spend. It's not good for everyone. It's not good for everyone. It's not good for the renewable energy industry, and it's not good for the efficiency industrial complex, which can't sell their products and services. They can't get new additional taxes, if not for their need to reduce the consumption. So we have a couple of things happening here in Vermont with regards to energy policy. Number one, we have a carrot and stick approach for our electricity consumption for the utilities. That was passed last year. We have incentivized, as a state government policy, to encourage the utilities to sell more electricity for transportation fuels and for heating. So we have passed and that's the carrot. We're encouraging them to sell more electricity. The stick is that they have to have 55% of it next year. That has to come from renewable resources, wind, solar, water, and hydropower, and wood, biomass. And that scales up to 75%. So the goal of the Vermont Energy Plan, of Shumlin's Energy Plan, Governor Shumlin's Energy Plan, is to increase the amount, require the utilities to sell ever-increasing amounts of renewable fuels, or excuse me, renewable generated electricity, to allow them to sell more electricity so they can be made whole, and to virtually eliminate the use of petroleum fuels in Vermont in the next 34 years by 2050. Virtually eliminate. This isn't some, oh, it's a conspiracy theory by that fuel dealer lobbyist, or this is some left-wing agenda that will never see the light of day. This is government policy. The Comprehensive Energy Plan that was passed 5 years ago and will be introduced next week says the exact same thing. It's on page 3, I believe. We want to virtually eliminate the use of petroleum, the fuels that our member companies sell, and the jobs that they provide, which are substantial. We contribute $100 million in direct fuel taxes to the economy. Those are taxes that go to the general fund in forms of sales tax on heating fuel to businesses. That's motor fuel excise tax that paves the roads and repairs the bridges. That's money that goes for gross receipts tax that pays for weatherization. That's money that's from the petroleum distributor's licensing fee that pays to clean up spills when oil does spill or gasoline does spill. Never mind the 8,000 plus or minus jobs that are created in the fuel industry distributing oil, gas, and propane throughout the state, and all the income taxes and the property taxes paid. That said, when their government policy is to eliminate 90% of this fuel, it's also eliminating 90% of the companies and the jobs that they provide and the taxes they provide. That's why we are opposed to that policy. However, you may look at that and say, yeah, that's just words on a page. That's words on a page. And yes, we're incentivizing the utilities to sell more electricity and we're requiring them to sell more renewable. But how can that possibly happen? How can that possibly happen? Well, it can't happen at the prices we have today. At the prices we have today, oil, heat, and propane is on par with chunk wood, with wood pellets, with natural gas. With oil heat's on par and propane's on par with any fuel source out there, whether it's the most efficient cold climate electric heat pump or whether it's wood. Gasoline, or buy a Tesla or an all-electric Prius. At the current price of gasoline, it does not make economic sense. Now, people will convert to cold climate heat pumps. People will convert to solar. People will buy themselves a Tesla or Prius. We understand that. But they won't be doing it for economic reasons at these prices. So how do they change that? How does my friends on the left change that? They change that by instituting a carbon tax. So as currently constructed, there are 28 lawmakers in Montpelier that have signed on to one or two bills. Some have signed on to both, H412 and H395. That would create an escalating carbon tax on all fossil fuels. Coal, butane, jet fuel, kerosene, everyone's in. Natural gas, heating oil, diesel fuel. And how it would work is that they'd assess it on as a per metric ton. So it starts at $10 and then every year it goes up $10 till you get to $100 per metric ton. At the high end, and I always go to the high end because that's where we're going to be if this passes, $100 per metric ton means $1 a gallon on diesel fuel, $1 per gallon on heating oil, and about 89 cents a gallon on gasoline. About 58 cents on propane, less carbon at the burner tip. So when you talk about that money, how much does that equal? Well, if you add it all up, somewhere between $500 and $600 million. So $500 and $600 million, that right now is essentially a tax cut. The reduction in prices has been essentially a tax cut that has allowed the economy to flourish or do better than it has been. But the idea that we're going to take $600 million out of the economy and then redistribute it within state government, there's a couple of problems with it from our perspective. Number one, in order for the carbon tax to do what they want it to do, we have to pass the tax along. No, keep in mind, any tax that gets passed on, the petroleum distributor's licensing fee, the excise tax, the gross receipts tax, eventually the end user pays. That's just how it is. You can't increase the cost of our product, $2 a gallon. You increase it by $1 a gallon. You increase our cost by 50%. We cannot survive without passing that tax along. But they'll try to say that, oh, no, ExxonMobil's going to write a check, or the consumer won't even feel it. It's a doublespeak. In order for a carbon tax to work, it has to force people to use less by making it more expensive. So, in fact, consumers will pay, because it's intuitive to anyone in business that you have to pass along your fixed costs. But it's also, that's how the carbon tax works. By raising the cost, you can no longer afford heating oil, so you have to convert to electric heat pumps or to wood. You can no longer afford gasoline, so it's in your economic interest to switch to an electric car. That's how the carbon tax philosophy, that's how the people in Montpelier that are dominating this debate, quite frankly, and they are. They have 500, so who supports this? So number of lawmakers in Chittenden County, all Democrats. None in Rutland County, believe it or not. We don't have anyone in Rutland County who supports the carbon tax. But the bill as proposed would effectively require us to pass along $1 per gallon to our customers in an effort to convince you to buy less of our product. when we say, well, listen, this is going to harm the economy, they say, well, we're going to redistribute the money, just like they do in British Columbia, which is their frequent example of how another another state, province that does what they intend to do. Except in British Columbia, here's what happens. There's a $30 per metric ton, so about 30 cents a gallon, carbon tax in British Columbia. And in British Columbia, what they do is they've collected $5 billion in carbon taxes over the past 6 years, and they've redistributed $5.7 billion. In other words, they've taken $1 and they've given back $1.14. They call that revenue neutral. In Vermont, we do the opposite. We give $1 and they give back 80 to 90 cents. So depending on what bill that is, H412 gives back 90 cents, H395 gives back 80 cents. Who gets that money? Wait for it. The same advocates that are lobbying for the carbon tax. It would go to the renewable energy industry and the efficiency industry. So they skim off 10 to 20%, and then the rest goes back in the form of either dropping the sales tax from 6% to 5%, or in the form of low-income tax credits. For anyone who files taxes, they would get a rebate check, anywhere between $100 to $350, depending on where the tax is, because it is a regressive tax. People with lower incomes pay a greater portion of their income in energy taxes, in energy, than people at the higher end of the income stream. That's the solution, and that's not revenue neutral in our point of view. Furthermore, when they talk about British Columbia and how it hasn't sunk their economy, British Columbia, you have to understand the geography of British Columbia. You've got the Pacific Ocean, you've got the Rocky Mountains, you've got 1,200 miles of international border. People aren't crossing the border to save 30 cents on gas. But I can tell you, in Vermont, particularly where I grew up in the Connecticut River Valley in Windham County, people are crossing the bridge to save 8 cents, because that's the differential right now between the New Hampshire state excise tax and the Vermont state excise tax. We have had member companies of ours their gasoline stations have gone out of business, gone up for auction with few bidders, because they can't compete with that 8-cent differential in New Hampshire. What's going to happen if we have a carbon tax and that differential is $1? The bridges will be worn out between Brattleboro and Hinsdale, Bellows Falls, and Walpole, Springfield and Claremont, White River and Hanover, in Lebanon. They'll be worn out because people will be crossing to fill up their tanks, to fill up their jerry cans, to fill up their skid tanks, and whatever they can to do if there's $1 differential. But we won't have any money to fix the bridges, because all of it will be going to Concord. Remember, we pay $100 million to fix the roads and bridges here in terms of excise taxes. So that's problem number one. Problem number two is, if you're a business and you're located anywhere in Vermont, but particularly if you're living on a border state and you're thinking about expanding your operation, why? Why would you consider Vermont when your costs of energy, your costs for gasoline for your service vehicles, your costs to heat your building, your costs for if you have any manufacturing, your process fuels are 50% higher than, not California, or not Texas, or not Ohio, 50% higher than New York, Massachusetts, or New Hampshire. The bottom line is not under consideration here. So when we explain, okay, you're putting our economy at risk, good folks in the legislature that support this measure, none who are in this room, when you do that, you're really putting jobs at risk, you're putting taxes at risk, you're putting businesses at risk, because everyone is going to follow the cheaper price, and that's across the border. And the answer is yes, of course, but we need to do this for the climate. We need to reduce our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And then when you really get them in the room and you take the cameras away and you explain, what will this do to reduce our consumption of fossil fuels? What will it do for global climate change? And they'll say, and they'll admit it, nothing. Nothing. We use so little energy in Vermont. We're 50th in fossil fuel consumption in the United States, 50 out of 50. We're 50 out of 50 in carbon dioxide emissions. So we understand that no matter where you are on the spectrum of how big of a problem this is, from not at all to a most significant problem, we realize that even if you think this is the biggest problem the society has ever faced, it will not make one iota of difference in terms of the global reduction of fossil fuels and the reduction of greenhouse gases. But they have an answer for that too. They say we need to be a leader. We need to be the leader. Well, in my opinion, allowing them to show off at cocktail parties in Paris and Washington, D.C. amongst all their friends and show that, hey, Vermont led the way, is no reason to commit economic suicide, which is exactly what it would be if we raise our energy costs by 50%. If we put out of business the local Vermont heating fuel dealers and gasoline distributors who live in their communities, pay taxes, property taxes and income taxes in their communities, and employ some 8,000 Vermonters in very well-paid jobs. That's not what we should be doing. Now, should we be reducing the use of fossil fuels? Well, sure, it's a commodity, and if you use less of it, then we understand. You have more money for other things in life. And because it is a competitive marketplace, that is exactly what has been happening. You know, 40 years ago, I have this picture on my wall of some old oil trucks in 1960. And I always show it to people, and they're, you know, the 1960 oil truck. You can imagine what they look like. We sold more heating oil in the 1960s than we do today with half the population. Why? Because homes weren't built as well, burners weren't built as well, furnaces, boilers weren't built as well. The average home in the 1960s used 1,500 gallons of heating oil. Today we're less than 700 gallons. Because people don't call our offices and say, how can I burn more of your product? They want to know how they can burn less. And if we don't give them the answer in this competitive marketplace, they'll find someone who can give them the answer. So we've improved our building stock, we've improved our fuel quality, we've improved our burners and our boilers and our furnaces, and as a result, we are selling half the gallons we sold 30 years ago. We're down 34% in heating oil in the past 10 years, and gasoline's the same way, with more efficient cars and trucks. Gasoline consumption in Vermont is down 10%. In fact, that's a real problem for the transportation budget. We've got to figure out, transportation costs keep going up, gasoline, even when we raise the gas tax, gasoline tax and diesel fuel tax revenues go down. So now there's a real problem. There's a real problem that needs some focus. But instead, we're being distracted by this idea that the most important thing we can do here in Vermont is simply virtually eliminate fossil fuel consumption. But I'll tell you, you know, if you live in Chittenden County and you take a bus or you walk to work and you live in a small apartment and the prospect of getting a $311 tax rebate check may seem attractive, and you may sign on to the pro-carbon tax petition. But if you live anywhere else, it doesn't make much sense. Prius doesn't make a plow truck, and Tesla doesn't make a tractor. And we need those things in order to keep our 8,000 miles of dirt roads clear, in order to keep them passable. We need diesel fuel in order to get our kids to school. And you want to charge the school boards $1 a gallon on that diesel fuel?
Not this year.
The idea that we're going to start carving out exemptions, churches. You want to talk about a church that uses 10,000 gallons of heating oil? We'll add $10,000 to your donations, from your donations, because that's what it's going to cost. There are no exemptions in the law. Nonprofits don't get out. Farmers don't get out. Farmers use 10 million gallons for their tractors. Okay, farmers, send another $10 million to Montpelier. Why? You're not going to stop plowing your fields. You're not going to stop making milk. You're not going to stop trucking your milk. But those trucks that move the milk and the tractors that plow the fields, $1 a gallon. Again, in the name of climate change. So if I sound like a crazy person up here, I apologize. But if you're in Montpelier and around the state as I am, and you interact with the Vermont Public Interest Research Group and some of the people that truly believe that this is the most important cause, most important thing we can do as a society, you start hearing it from them. I mean, I've had people come up to me and say, Matt, this is inevitable. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. Maybe not this year. Chairman Tony Klein has told me personally, told this committee, it's not going to happen this year, Matt. Calm down. Calm down. It's not going to happen this year. And it's not going to happen this year. It's not going to happen in 2016. But I'm not going to stop talking about it because the other side continues to go door to door to gain signatures on their petitions, telling people that, hey, wouldn't you like the polluters to pay? Wouldn't you like the polluters to pay and for you to get a check? They even have surveys saying, what would you spend your money on if we got the polluters to pay and we help reduce climate change? It's disingenuous. It doesn't explain what everyone who has ever run a business knows. When your taxes go up, when your cost of business goes up, if you don't pass along that cost, you're no longer in business. You're turning out the lights. So when you hear this debate, you're hearing two completely different things. From my side, It's, if you're going to pass along this cost to convince our customers to use less of the product we sell, we're going to be against it. Of course we are. But the other side isn't telling the full story. They're claiming that polluters are going to pay. Even a quote from Representative Dean, one of the sponsors, and when I used to live in Westminster, one of my reps, was, I don't know why everyone's so worried. No, we don't own an oil patch in Vermont. That's right, we don't have an oil patch in Vermont. But it's also disingenuous to say that BP or ExxonMobil is going to be footing the bill for this. It's going to be the polluters that pay, the clever slogan that they've spent lots of money coming up with, and a website and outreach and all that. The polluters are all of us. Anyone that puts a kid on a bus, anyone that plows their fields, anyone that drives a plow truck, you're a polluter and you will pay, although it makes it sound like it's really the large oil companies. So obviously we're thoroughly against it, and people say, well, Matt, you know, you work for the oil companies. Of course you're against it. You know. And I say, yeah, I owe the oil companies a lot. You know, I grew up in an oil company family in Bells Falls, Vermont. And I can tell you, you know, being on the other end of that house, you know, working as a teenager, filling a tank, you know, when it's 0 degrees outside, carrying a 100-pound hose over your shoulder and walking up to a tank and filling a tank and realizing the people inside are going to be warm tonight because of what you're doing. How miserable it is to be out in the cold and the dark and the wind and the rain and the snow and to be doing this business. It's a fantastic business. I'm very proud of the people I work for. But the idea that as you are providing something so essential in a cold rural state like heat, and that the other side thinks that what you're doing is wrong, that you shouldn't be selling this, that we need to tax it, and knowing that people inside, they can't afford another $1 a gallon. They can't afford it. They can't wait till April 15th to get a $311 rebate check. They need the oil now, and the fuel company providing it needs the money to pay for it. This isn't a charity. We don't do this for free. We need to be able to pay ourselves, pay our employees, pay our insurance, pay our taxes, pay our mortgages, pay our truck loans, and at the end of the day, provide a service that is very valuable. So in this cold rural state, I encourage you to do what you can to speak out against the carbon tax, because it may not come this year, it may not come next year, but I've looked into the heart of the opposition, and they are not giving up. This is a moral cause for them. There's a moral imperative to rid the world of fossil fuels, and in their mind it starts in Vermont, and it starts with a carbon tax. Thank you for your time. Can I ask a few questions, Bob?